Madam, please run. Now.
It was only a scrap of paper, folded once, slipped into my hand by a young man behind the bank counter. My daughter-in-law sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, unaware. Behind us, in the waiting area, two men in black suits watched me far too closely. When I looked back at the clerk, his eyes pleaded with me, not words fear. There are moments in life when everything hinges on a single breath, a single choice. A scrap of paper folded once and pressed into your palm by a stranger, whose name you'll never know. There are moments in life when everything hinges on a single breath. A scrap of paper folded once and pressed into your palm by a stranger, whose name you'll never know. This is the story of such a moment. My name is Hannah Beaumont. Or rather, it was. For 32 years, I wore that name like a prison sentence. Now I'm simply Hannah Clerk. Again, the girl I was before I made the catastrophic mistake of marrying Julian Beaumont. It was a Thursday afternoon in July, sweltering heat sitting on London like a wet blanket. I stood outside the family court on High Holborn, holding nothing in my hands. No documents, no photographs, no apology. The divorce had been finalized an hour earlier. 32 years of marriage, dissolved in less time than it takes to watch a film. I watched Julian walk past me without a glance. At his side, as always, was his mother, Constance Beaumont. Chin raised, eyes sharp with triumph, her mouth curved in that particular smile she reserved for moments of victory. They did not speak to me. They did not need to, but it was their laughter that cut deepest. As they descended the steps, Constance said something, and Julian threw back his head and laughed. Rich, careless laughter. The sound of a man unburdened. I stood there in the heat, watching them disappear into a waiting car. And I thought, this is what erasure looks like. 6 weeks later, Julian married again. Her name was Sophie Lane. 29 years old. Blonde, elegant, expensively dressed in that effortless way that only comes with money. The wedding was lavish. Society pages called it a fresh beginning. And I was described as the foolish ex-wife. The woman who'd been used and discarded. I said nothing, because I was waiting. You see, 3 days before the divorce was finalized, something extraordinary had happened. It was a Monday morning. The Coutts branch on the Strand was nearly empty. I'd gone to close my personal account, what little money I had left. My stepdaughter Arabella had insisted on accompanying me. Just to help, Hannah, she'd said sweetly. These financial matters can be so confusing for you. We sat in the waiting area, me, clutching my handbag, Arabella scrolling through her phone. Behind us, two men in dark suits pretended to read newspapers, but I'd felt their eyes on me.
Mrs. Beaumont?
A young clerk stood at the counter. His name badge read Thomas Fletcher. He had kind eyes, nervous eyes. I approached with Arabella beside me. Just here to close an account, I said quietly. Thomas nodded, his fingers trembling as he passed me the pen. That's when it happened. His hand brushed mine. And in that brief contact, I felt it. Something small. Paper. Folded. I looked up sharply. His eyes met mine for just a second. Not words fear. Pure absolute fear. I signed the forms mechanically, palming the note into my coat pocket. Arabella linked her arm through mine as we left. Shall we have lunch? I'm rather tired, darling, I said. Perhaps another time. I waited until I was in the taxi until it had pulled away. Then I pulled out the note.
Madam, please run. Now.
They are transferring everything. By Thursday it will all be gone. There is proof. Document reference 847 BEA 1989. Request it from archives before 3 p.m. Today. After that it will disappear. I am sorry.
Please run.
My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the paper. Driver, I said. Change of destination. Lincoln's Inn. The archives office. Quickly. We made it with 17 minutes to spare. I had the reference number. That made all the difference. Document 847 BEA 1989, I said to the clerk. I need it immediately. Please. She returned 14 minutes later with a thin manila folder. I clutched it to my chest and walked out into the July heat. I read it in a coffee shop 2 streets away. The document was a trust agreement. dated 1989, the year I married Julian. £20 million, set up by Julian's father for the care and security of Hannah Clark Beaumont. £20 million I'd never known existed. And there at the bottom was my signature. Recent, dated 2 weeks earlier, consenting to dissolve the trust and transfer everything to Julian. Except I'd never signed it. I'd never even seen the document. I sat in that coffee shop for 3 hours as rain hammered the windows. I sat there holding proof that my husband had forged my signature to steal. £20 million meant to protect me. And suddenly, everything made sense. The rushed divorce. The generous settlement of £200,000. Julian's eagerness to finalise everything. Constance's triumph. Arabella's solicitousness. The men in dark suits watching me. They'd been planning this for months. Creating forged documents. Bribing officials. And after Thursday, I would have had no legal standing to question anything. I would have disappeared completely. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. I went to my solicitor that night. Put the documents on his desk. Good God, he whispered. This is massive fraud. Yes, I said calmly. I know. We need to stop the divorce. No, I interrupted. We let it proceed. Let them think they've won. So on Thursday, I stood outside the family court and let them walk past me. Let them laugh. I went home to my small flat and I waited. 6 weeks. Through Julian's wedding to Sophie. Through the society pages celebrating his fresh start. I waited. And then, on a September morning, I walked into the serious fraud office and handed them everything. The investigation took 4 months. The arrest came just before Christmas. Julian, Constance, the lawyers, even Arabella, all charged with fraud, forgery, conspiracy. The trial was spectacular. Banking Air faces 20 years for fraud scheme. I testified for 3 days. Calm, clear, unshakable. And when the verdicts came guilty, all of them, I sat in the gallery and felt something I hadn't felt in 32 years. Free. I live in Cornwall now. A cottage in St. Ives overlooking the sea. I bought it with the trust money properly restored to me by court order. I give most of it away to women's charities, refuges, legal aid funds. I keep enough to live simply, quietly. Julian is in prison. So is Constance. 15 years minimum. Sophie divorced him before the trial ended. And me? I'm 71 now. My name is Hannah Clark. Not Beaumont. Never again. I volunteer at the library. I have real friends who know me as Hannah. And sometimes on quiet mornings I take out that note.
Madam, please run. Now.
And I think I did. I ran straight toward justice. And how at 68 I finally learned to fight.
A toast to the happy couple.
To the happy couple.
Crystal glasses clinking. Murmured conversation and laughter. The reception was held at Claridge's. Of course it was. Nothing but the best for Julian Beaumont's second wedding. I wasn't there, naturally. Ex-wives don't receive invitations to their replacement's celebration. But I knew every detail. The guest list. The menu. The precise shade of ivory Sophie had chosen for the table linens. I'd made it my business to know. Picture it, if you will. The grand ballroom. 300 guests in morning suits and designer gowns. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables dressed in silk and lace. Champagne flowing like water. The bride radiant in Vera Wang. The groom distinguished and proud, his mother beaming beside him. A fairy tale, they called it in the society pages. It was 3:30 when everything began to unravel. I've been told by people who were there, who witnessed it firsthand, that it started at the bar. A guest attempting to pay for drinks. His card declined. He tried another. Declined again. Terribly sorry, sir, the barman said. Perhaps there's an issue with our system. But it wasn't the system. The sound of phones buzzing. Multiple phones. Urgency building. Within minutes it spread through the ballroom like fever. Card payments stopped working. Not just for one guest. For dozens. For everyone connected to Beaumont Holdings. Beaumont Investments, Beaumont Properties. Accounts frozen. Credit declined. Transactions blocked. Julian was pulled aside by his financial director. I'm told his face went white as paper. Constance clutched her. Pearls literally clutched them as someone whispered in her ear. Sophie, poor Sophie, stood in her beautiful gown, looking utterly bewildered as guests began making hurried exits, phones pressed to ears, panic barely concealed beneath polite smiles, the sound of hurried footsteps, doors opening and closing. By 4 o'clock, the ballroom was half empty. By 5, Julian and Constance were in a taxi racing back to their Belgravia townhouse. The reception abandoned. 300 guests, left to navigate their own sudden financial chaos. By 6 o'clock that evening, the story broke. Breaking news. Beaumont Holdings faces unprecedented financial collapse. Assets frozen. Fraud investigation underway. Authorities confirm all company accounts have been seized. Pending criminal proceedings. I was in my cottage in Cornwall when I heard. Sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of amber and rose. I didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't feel triumph exactly. I felt vindicated. You see, they thought the trial was the end of it. Julian and Constance sentenced to 15 years for fraud. Assets restored to me. Justice served. They thought I'd take my money and fade away quietly. Gratefully. They thought I'd be content with survival. They were wrong. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd spent the 5 years between that note at the bank and their sentencing doing far more than simply waiting. I'd been watching, listening, learning, and most importantly, I'd been buying. It started small. Anonymous purchases through shell companies. A few shares here. A small stake there. Nothing noticeable. Nothing that would raise alarms. The trust money £20 million was more than enough to begin. But I was careful.
Patient.
Strategic. I hired investigators, forensic accountants, people who understood the labyrinth of offshore holdings and corporate structures that families like the Beaumonts used to hide their wealth. And slowly, piece by piece, purchase by purchase, I began to acquire what they thought they owned. Beaumont Holdings, I bought a controlling interest through 3 different investment firms. Beaumont Properties, I purchased the debt they'd leveraged against their portfolio, then called it due. Beaumont Investments, I became their largest shareholder without them ever knowing my name. It took 5 years. 5 years of careful planning. 5 years of watching them celebrate their freedom out on bail, preparing their defense, still living in luxury while I supposedly cowered in my small flat. But I wasn't cowering. I was building. And on the day of Julian's wedding to Sophie, that perfect, extravagant display of wealth and privilege, I activated everything. 1 phone call. That's all it took. To the Serious Fraud Office, to inform them that as the new majority owner of all Beaumont assets, I was formally requesting a freeze on all accounts, pending full investigation of corporate fraud. 1 phone call and their world collapsed. The investigation revealed what I'd suspected. The fraud hadn't been limited to my trust fund. It went deeper, decades deeper. Tax evasion, money laundering, insider trading, bribery. Every crime the wealthy commit when they believe they're untouchable. Julian's father, the late Edward Beaumont, had built an empire on corruption. And Julian and Constance had maintained it, expanded it, perfected it. They'd stolen from investors, from pension funds, from ordinary people who'd trusted the Beaumont name. My £20 million was only the beginning. Within hours of the wedding reception, the authorities moved in. Not just the fraud office, the National Crime Agency, Hamasi, even Interpol for the offshore accounts. The Belgravia townhouse seized. It had been purchased with laundered money. The country estate in Gloucestershire seized, built on fraudulent investment schemes. The art collection, the cars, the jewellery, all of it traced back to illegal activity. And because I now controlled the companies they'd used to commit these crimes, I had access to everything. Every document, every transaction, every secret they'd buried. I handed it all over. Every single piece of evidence. Not for revenge, though I won't pretend that wasn't part of it, but for justice. For all the people they'd hurt. For all the lives they'd destroyed while living in luxury. Sophie left him within a week. the fairy tale marriage annulled before it had really begun. I felt sorry for her, actually. She'd been a prop in their theatre of respectability. Another way to prove Julian had moved on, reformed, deserved a second chance. She was 29 and her name would forever be attached to one of Britain's biggest financial scandals. Arabella, Julian's daughter from his first marriage, tried to contact me. She left 17 voicemails over 3 days. "Hannah, please." I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the extent of it. "Please, can we talk? I'm so sorry." I'm so sorry. I never returned her calls. Some apologies come too late. The media circus lasted months. From fairy tale to fraud, the fall of the Beaumont dynasty. How a discarded wife brought down a banking empire. The woman they underestimated. I gave one interview. Just one. To a respected journalist from The Guardian who'd covered the original trial. She came to my cottage in St. Ives. We sat by the window watching the waves. "Mrs. Clerk, many people are calling you a hero." How does that feel? I'm not a hero. Heroes act out of nobility. I acted out of necessity. But you've recovered over £300 million in stolen assets. Money that will be returned to the victims of the Beaumont fraud schemes. That's not heroism. That's simply what should have been done years ago. What would you say to other women in similar situations? Women being erased, stolen from, underestimated? I'd say, don't mistake silence for acceptance. Don't confuse patience with weakness. And most importantly, don't let anyone convince you that you're invisible. Because the moment they stop seeing you is the moment you can move freely. The article ran with the headline, "The Invisible Woman Who Saw Everything." It was perfect. Julian and Constance received additional sentences. 25 years each now. They'll die in prison most likely. I feel nothing about this. Not satisfaction, not pity. Just nothing. They're simply gone from my life. As if they never existed. I'm making tea. It's what we do, isn't it, we British? When the world falls apart, when everything changes, when justice is finally served, we make tea. I give away most of the money still. The recovered assets, once they're released by the courts, go to the victims first. What's left, I distribute carefully. Women's charities, legal aid, education funds for working-class children. I keep my cottage. My simple life. My peace. The sound of a cup being set down. People ask me, sometimes neighbours, friends I've made here in Cornwall, if I regret the 32 years I lost to Julian Beaumont. The answer is complicated. I regret the time, yes. The opportunities missed. The woman I might have been, if I hadn't tried so hard to be the woman they wanted. But I don't regret the lessons. I learned that survival sometimes looks like surrender. That patience is its own form of power. That being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage you can have. And I learned that it's never too late. Never too late to fight back. Never too late to reclaim yourself. I was 68 when I handed that evidence to the fraud office. 73 when I watched Julian's wedding collapse in real time. Age is just a number. Justice has no expiration date. I live in a cottage by the sea. I exist peacefully. And somewhere in London, in a ballroom at Claridge's, there's a memory of the day everything turned. The day they finally learned that the woman they'd erased was never really gone. She was simply waiting, watching. And when the moment came, she moved.
Breaking news from Westminster this hour as the Prime Minister and...
The pound has fallen sharply following the...
Julian did not disappear quietly. I suppose I should have expected that. Men like him, men who've spent their entire lives being listened to, believed, centered they don't accept defeat gracefully. They fight. They twist narratives. They perform. And Julian Beaumont had always been an excellent performer. Julian Beaumont spoke to reporters outside his solicitor's office today, visibly emotional as he denied all charges. I am the victim here. The victim of a vindictive ex-wife who cannot accept that I've moved on with my life. Hannah has orchestrated this entire nightmare out of spite, out of jealousy. She's destroyed my family, my reputation, everything I've built. I was in my cottage when I first heard him. The television on in the background while I made breakfast. I froze, spatula in hand, listening to him cry for the cameras. Cry. Actually cry. In 32 years of marriage, I'd never seen Julian cry. Not when his father died. Not when we lost our daughter 3 days after she was born. Not once. But for the cameras? For public sympathy? Oh, he could summon tears beautifully. The media feeding frenzy lasted weeks. Every tabloid, every news program, every online publication picked apart the story. And in the beginning, in those crucial first weeks, they believed him. Of course they did. He was Julian Beaumont, educated at Eton and Oxford, from a respected banking family. Handsome, articulate, wounded. And I was just Hannah Clark, a nobody from Peckham who'd married above her station, and was now, apparently, hell-bent on revenge. The headlines were vicious. Scorned wife's vendetta destroys innocent man. Hannah Clark, the woman who weaponized divorce. Friends described Beaumont's ex as manipulative and cold. Friends. They quoted friends I'd never met. Anonymous sources who painted me as calculating, bitter, unhinged. Who claimed I'd always been jealous of Julian's success, resentful of his family's wealth. One particularly creative piece suggested I'd seduced Julian, deliberately targeting him for his money from the very beginning. I was 23 when we met. He was 35. I was a secretary at his father's firm. I had £17 in my bank account and lived in a bedsit with mould on the ceiling. But yes, I was clearly the master manipulator in that scenario. My solicitor rang me daily during those weeks.
Hannah, we need to respond. We need to get your side out there. The public narrative is getting away from us.
Let it, I said calmly.
But Hannah...
Let them believe him. For now. Because I knew something they didn't. Something Julian, in his arrogance, had forgotten. The truth has a way of emerging, especially when you've spent 5 years meticulously documenting it. Edward Sinclair appeared on a Tuesday morning in late October. I answered the door to find a man in his late 50s. Tall and lean, with grey hair and the kind of face that's learned not to smile unnecessarily. He carried a leather briefcase and wore a mackintosh against the Cornish drizzle. Mrs. Clark, my name is Edward Sinclair. I'm a corporate investigator. I wonder if I might have a word. I hesitated. The press had been relentless. Reporters disguised as delivery men. Photographers with long lenses hiding in the village. But something about him felt different, quieter, more serious. Come in, I said. We sat in my small sitting room. The rain streaking the windows, the sea grey and restless beyond. I made tea because what else does one do? And waited for him to explain himself. Edward Sinclair was not a man who wasted words.
Mrs. Clark, I've spent the past 3 months investigating Julian Beaumont on behalf of several corporate clients who suspect fraud. What I've found...
He paused, opening his briefcase. What I've found goes far beyond anything currently under investigation. He laid out documents like a poker player revealing a winning hand. Bank statements, wire transfer records, corporate emails, photographs, embezzlement, he said, pointing to highlighted figures. Over £15 million, siphoned from client accounts over a 10-year period. Another document. Illegal gambling. He has debts with 3 separate casinos. 2 in London, 1 in Monaco. Currently owes approximately £4 million. Another stack. And this is the most serious, industrial espionage. He's been selling proprietary technology designs, patents, trade secrets to overseas competitors. China primarily. Russia. I stared at the papers spread across my coffee table. At the evidence of crimes I'd never imagined. Fraud, yes. I'd known about the fraud. But this... Why are you telling me this? I asked quietly. Edward looked at me with something that might have been respect.
Because you're the only one who's managed to hurt him. The only one he didn't see coming. I've been trying to build a case against Beaumont for 2 years. Every time I get close, evidence disappears. Witnesses recant. Files go missing. He leaned forward. But you froze his assets. You exposed his fraud. You've done in months what I couldn't do in years. I need your help, Mrs. Clark. And you need mine. Because what he's doing now, painting you as a vengeful ex-wife, it's working. Public opinion is turning against you. But if we reveal this, he gestured at the documents, if we show them who he really is, they'll have no choice but to believe you.
I looked at this stranger who'd appeared on my doorstep, like something out of a spy novel. This man who preferred facts to feelings, evidence to emotion. "What do you need from me?" I asked. We worked together for 6 weeks. Edward would arrive each morning with more documents, more evidence. We'd sit at my small dining table, the one overlooking the sea, and piece together the full scope of Julian's crimes. It was worse than either of us had imagined. The gambling debts alone would have ruined him. He'd been using company money to pay them off, falsifying records, creating phantom accounts. The industrial espionage was borderline treasonous. British defence technology sold to foreign governments for personal profit. And the embezzlement, layer upon layer of it, not just from corporate clients, but from individuals. Elderly investors who'd trusted the Beaumont name. Pension funds, charities. My £20 million trust fund was almost quaint in comparison. How did he think he'd get away with this? I asked one afternoon, staring at a particularly damning email chain. Edward looked up from his laptop. Because he always has. Men like Beaumont, they grow up believing the rules don't apply to them. And for most of their lives, they're right. Until they're not, I said quietly. Until they're not, he agreed. The evidence went to every relevant authority simultaneously. The Serious Fraud Office, the National Crime Agency, MI5 for the espionage charges, SCHMARC, the Financial Conduct Authority, and to the press, selected journalists, ones with reputations for thorough investigation rather than sensationalism. The story broke on a Sunday evening. Front page of the Sunday Times. Beaumont scandal deepens evidence of espionage, embezzlement and international crime. By Monday morning, every news outlet in the country was running it. Shocking revelations about the extent of Julian Beaumont's criminal enterprise. Sold British defence secrets to foreign powers. Victims now number in the hundreds. Questions about how he evaded detection for so long. The public narrative shifted overnight. Suddenly, I wasn't the vengeful ex-wife. I was the whistleblower. The woman who'd uncovered one of Britain's most elaborate financial crimes. The think pieces were almost embarrassing in their reversal. Hannah Clerk. The courage to speak truth to power. How we failed to believe the woman who was right all along. The Beaumont affair, a study in male privilege and female erasure. I gave no interviews, made no statements. Let the evidence speak for itself. But Edward did. He appeared on Newsnight on Radio 4 in the pages of every serious newspaper. Calm, factual, devastating. The question isn't whether Julian Beaumont is guilty, he said in one particularly memorable interview. The question is how many lives he destroyed, and how we as a society allowed it to happen for so long. Julian's second trial began in January. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with journalists, victims, observers. I attended every day, sat in the same spot in the public gallery. Not hiding, not gloating, simply bearing witness. Julian looked different, smaller somehow. The expensive suits couldn't hide how diminished he'd become. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The evidence was overwhelming. Edward had done his work thoroughly. There was no defense, really. Just mitigation. Explanations. Excuses. His barrister tried. My client made mistakes, yes. But he's not the monster the prosecution portrays. He's a man who fell into addiction, who made poor choices, But the prosecutor was merciless. This wasn't addiction. This was calculated, systematic theft and betrayal. For profit. For personal gain. While presenting himself as a pillar of society. The verdicts came after 4 days of deliberation. Guilty.
In light of the overwhelming evidence, this court finds you guilty on all counts.
On all counts? The judge's voice was cold as winter sea. Mr. Beaumont, you have betrayed your country, your clients, your family, and every value you claim to uphold. You have shown no remorse, only self-pity. I sentence you to 35 years imprisonment. 35 years, added to his previous 15. He would be 94 when released. He would die in prison. I felt nothing watching them take him away. Nothing but a quiet, settled peace. I survived. It's such a simple phrase, isn't it? 2 words. But they contain multitudes. I survived the marriage, the erasure, the theft, the lies, the collapse, the investigations, the trials, the weight of justice. I survived all of it, and then slowly, quietly like spring. Arriving after the longest winter, I healed. My cottage in St. Ives has become more than shelter. It's become home in a way nowhere else ever was. Not the Belgravia townhouse with its perfect proportions and cold elegance. Not the country estate in Gloucestershire, where I spent weekends feeling like an intruder. This small cottage with its creaking floorboards and salt-stained windows, with its view of the sea and its garden full of wildflowers, this is mine. Truly mine. I wake when I choose, sleep when I'm tired, eat what I fancy. Simple freedoms. Revolutionary freedoms after a lifetime of being managed. The sea never quite looks right. The light always escapes me. But it doesn't matter. No one's judging. No one's critiquing. I've joined the Women's Institute. Me, Hannah Clerk. Leading discussions on literature and local history. Making jam for the village fete. Learning to play bridge with a group of women who've become true friends. They know my story, of course. Everyone does. But they don't treat me like a victim or a celebrity. Just Hannah. Their friend who makes decent scones and always remembers birthdays. Dorothy, my dear friend Dorothy, who's 79 and fierce as a winter. Storm sits with me most afternoons. We knit together by the window. She's teaching me Fair Isle patterns. I'm hopeless at them, but she's patient. You're thinking too much, she said yesterday, watching me struggle with the colour work. It's not about perfection, love. It's about the rhythm, the meditation of it. She's right, of course. About knitting. About life. I am no longer someone's wife. For 32 years, that's who I was. Julian Beaumont's wife. Mrs. Beaumont. The identity that defined and confined me. Even after the divorce, I was still Julian's ex-wife. Still defined by him. But not anymore. I am no longer someone's daughter-in-law. Suffering Constance's barbs and impossible standards. I am no longer someone's unpaid domestic. No longer invisible help in my own home. I live under my own name now. Hannah Clerk. The name my mother gave me 74 years ago. And it fits. Finally, it fits.
Hannah, are you home?
That's Edward. Edward Sinclair. The corporate investigator who appeared on my doorstep 2 years ago. With a briefcase full of evidence. We've become, well, the word friends feels insufficient. Companions, perhaps. Fellow travellers who've been through something extraordinary together. Tea? I ask.
Please.
Dreadful traffic coming down from London. Took nearly 7 hours. He visits every few weeks now. Sometimes for business there are still matters to resolve. With Beaumont Holdings. But mostly just to visit. To walk along the coastal path. To sit by my fire and talk about books, politics, life.
The board meeting went well.
He says, settling into the armchair across from me.
The restructuring is complete. All victims have been compensated. The company's actually turning a profit again.
That's wonderful, I say. And mean it.
They're asking when you might visit. The staff want to thank you properly.
I shake my head. I'm chairwoman in name only, Edward. You know that. I appointed good people to run things. I don't need to.
They want to see you.
He interrupts gently. Not as chairwoman. As the woman who saved them. Perhaps in the spring, I say quietly. He nods, understanding. Knowing I need time still. Knowing I may always need the distance, the space. The quiet life I've built here. Edward walks beside me now. Not ahead like Julian always did, striding forward. Expecting me to follow, to keep up, to stay silent. Not behind like some dutiful escort. Beside me. As an equal. As someone who sees me, values me, respects me. We walk the coastal path most evenings when he visits.
Are you happy, Hannah?
Edward asked me last week as we stood watching the sunset paint. The sea in shades of amber and rose. I considered the question. Really considered it. I'm not sure I know what happiness is, I said finally. I spent so many years just surviving, enduring. The concept of happiness feels foreign.
Then what do you feel?
He asked. I thought about my cottage, my friends, my freedom, the weight that had lifted, the breath I could finally draw fully. Peace, I said. He smiled. That's better than happiness, I think. Happiness is fleeting. Peace endures. People ask me sometimes, journalists occasionally, though I rarely give interviews. Neighbours, curious strangers who recognize me from the news coverage. They ask, isn't it too late to begin again at your age? They mean it kindly, I think. This assumption that 74 is somehow the end of living. That I should be content with survival, with vindication, with simply existing. And I answer softly, but with absolute certainty. It is only late. It is never impossible. Because here is what I've learned. Life doesn't stop at 50 or 60 or 70. It doesn't end when your marriage ends or your purpose shifts or your children grow or your body slows. Life continues, offering chances, opening doors, presenting possibilities, but you have to be willing to see them, to reach for them, to believe you're still worthy of beginning again. I'm learning Italian at 74. Dorothy thinks I'm mad. Whatever for? She asked when I showed her the textbooks I'd ordered. Because I've always wanted to, I said simply. Because I can. Because it's never too late to become the person I might have been. She laughed and hugged me. You're quite something, Hannah Clark. I'm planning a trip to Venice. I've never been. Julian and I travelled extensively, but always to places he chose. Golf resorts, business conferences, stuffy hotels where he could network. I want to see Venice, to stand in St. Mark's Square and feed the pigeons, to ride a gondola and feel ridiculous and touristy and perfectly content, to eat gelato and practice my terrible Italian and exist as purely myself. Edward has offered to accompany me. As a friend, as a companion. Nothing more, though Dorothy has her theories, and she watches us with knowing eyes. You know, she said last week, you're allowed to be happy, Hannah, with someone, if you wanted. I know, I said. And I do. But I'm not rushing, not seeking. If something develops with Edward, it will. If it doesn't, I'm complete as I am. For the first time in my life, I'm enough. Just as I am, alone or accompanied. It doesn't matter. I am whole. I survived a marriage that tried to erase me. I exposed a criminal empire. I brought justice to hundreds of victims. I reclaimed my life, my name, myself. And now I'm learning Italian, making friends, planning adventures. Because even after 70 years, after decades of being diminished, dismissed, discarded life can still choose you back. If you let it. If you believe you're worthy of being chosen. If you remember that it's never too late to begin again. I look out my window now at the sea I've grown to love. At the village I call home. At the life I've built from the rubble of everything I lost. And I think this is what freedom feels like. Not perfect, not without scars, not without memory of pain, but mine. Authentically, completely, irrevocably mine. It is only late. It is never impossible.